Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Luke Jones joins us now from the castle in Owings Mills as the preparations. And look, man, it's easy to get all caught up in Lamar Jackson and Joe Flacco. The truth is nothing's changed here for about a month and a half. They're going to go run the same team, the same offense. Here comes Tampa. But a lot more questions outside of Lamar Jackson and Joe Flacco about the health of the secondary, about the Chargers game next week, about scoreboard watching with the Steelers, amongst all of these other teams. But there's more to the Ravens than just Lamar Jackson at this point, right?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I mean, you talk about the health of the secondary, and certainly people are going to be looking at the Chargers next week and what happens with New England, Pittsburgh. Let's not overlook the fact that Tampa Bay, for as erratic as it's been, and they've turned the ball over a ton, they have the number one passing game in the NFL. They're number 2 in total yards per game. They're 10th in points per game. They're, I want to say, first in third down offense. This is a team that can move the ball. Now, if you're disciplined, I think they'll throw it to you a few times. And Jameis Winston or Ryan Fitzpatrick, they both have had issues with that at the quarterback position. But when you're talking about the possibility of Marlon Humphrey being banged up, he didn't practice on Wednesday. Tavon Young, same story for him. Tony Jefferson still not on the practice field in the middle of the week. You have a secondary that potentially could be a little bit vulnerable. So not that I am at all predicting the Ravens to lose this game, because I think they're going to win this game. But don't sleepwalk at the beginning of this one. Don't show up at this one thinking about the Chargers or wondering what's going to happen with the Steelers, because this is a Tampa Bay offense that can make things interesting on you. And take a look at what happened with them against the Saints last Sunday. They had a 14-3 lead, I want to say, at halftime. So this is an offense that can move the ball if you're not careful. The good news is if you're disciplined and you are ready for it and you're ready to take advantage for it, and the fact that the Ravens finally picked off a pass on Sunday, you hope that that's a sign of more of those interceptions to come, because Jameis Winston has been very willing to accommodate if you'll allow him to.
As much as we talk about our quarterback stuff here, and you can go to the buyatoyota.com audio vault and listen to it over the last month, it will be the topic here over the next month. But it's completely different when you have a Super Bowl winning quarterback who has maybe lost a half a step, but certainly not 3 steps. It's not like Joe Flacco's over the hill. And you're talking about replacing him with this completely different kind of thing where you're in Tampa and you've used your number 1 pick on a kid who can or can't play, on a kid who was or wasn't mature enough or ready to do this, and you've got Ryan Fitzpatrick running around out there pressing your number 1 pick. That's a whole different narrative for this franchise than where the Ravens are with Lamar Jackson and Joe Flacco right now.
Yeah, of course, and that's why there's a lot of uncertainty there with Dirk Cutter, although you could say the same about John Harbaugh right now. But, I mean, that's a team that you look at their skill position players, and that's even with O.J. Howard being on IR. They have some good wide receivers. I mean, Mike Evans, one of the best in the league. Deshaun Jackson, a distinguished career. Adam Humphries has quietly done some nice things for them as a number 3 receiver. So it's not as though they're devoid of talent, but, boy, it's really difficult to win consistently when your quarterback keeps throwing the ball to the other team. And for as much as I said, they've put up yardage, they've scored points, they've also turned the ball over a ton. And when you have that from the quarterback position, and that's why, for as much as you want to sing the praises of this style and what Lamar Jackson has done for the Ravens, he's had some fumbles. Now, they've been pretty fortunate that they've recovered most of those, but in the case of the Tampa Bay Bucs with Jameis Winston, you throw the ball to the other team, you're not only ending your drive, but you're giving the other team extra possessions. And I don't need to tell you, that's a math thing. Again, you don't have to be Sig Mejdal to figure out that that's going to impact your win probability when you're turning the ball over like that. So, really, to your point, Tampa Bay, I mean, they had Jameis Winston, I mean, top pick and decorated career at Florida State, even with off-field controversy. I mean, I think anyone who watched him play, you understood special kind of talent, but it doesn't always translate, and it certainly hasn't translated for him. Off-the-field transgressions have been a big part of it as well. But
I wouldn't have drafted the kid. I know you and I were in Indianapolis the year he was drafted, and I'm like, I'll pass. That's how I always felt about it. I was always a Mariota guy in that argument because I thought that the floor was too easy for me to see in his personality, in his character, in his game,
Yeah, and that's fair. And look, I mean, Marcus Mariota, I don't know. I'm not convinced he's ever leading the Titans to a Super Bowl, but that's fair. But it also shows at some point in time, Jameis Winston was the top pick in the draft, and you go
now he's yesterday's news.
You look at Jamarcus Russell or Achilles Smith or Tim Couch. I mean, you just go down the list of guys that are these top picks. I mean, it's one thing to talk about a Lamar Jackson who was 32nd overall, where so many teams passed on him, right or wrong, and maybe he becomes a Hall of Famer one day, or maybe he flames out after.
You mean a Hall of Famer like Harold Baines?
Yeah. Yeah, you're really going to try to get me going on that one, right? Which, by the way, Harold Baines was one of my favorite players growing up.
Harold Baines is a good guy. I loved Harold Baines. Harold Baines is not a Hall of Fame player. But
let's get serious. We'll get into that at another point, because I definitely have thoughts on that.
I'm just trying to pick at the scabs at this point. It's been a long week.
I feel bad because he's a Maryland native.
I love Harold Baines.
Guy. Yeah,
I played billiards with Harold Baines one night. I mean, I love Harold Baines.
He said himself he was shocked. So what does that tell you? Anyway, going back to Jameis Winston and quarterback, I mean, you just don't know. And that's what's scary and also exciting for where the Ravens are with their situation. But Jameis Winston, the Buccaneers at this point are trying to decide if they're going to cut bait in the offseason. And, we're talking, 3 years after he was drafted. So it's never, as much as you want to try to make it an exact science, and as much as we have dissected pick after pick after pick, and especially looking at some of their day one and day two draft failures over the last 5 or 6 years, talking the Ravens, there's a lot of art to it. There's a lot of unknown. There's a lot of what's in between the ears and what's in that chest, what's in that heart, that you can try to figure out as much as you can by talking to college coaches and high school coaches and family members and watching tape and seeing combine numbers and going through 15-minute interviews at the combine and going through pre-draft visits, whether it's something informal, pro days, or they come to your facility, and you still don't know. You still end up drafting Kyle Bowler, for example. I mean, there's a lot of unknown, and the Buccaneers are kind of at the end of that process, it appears, with Jameis Winston, or near the end, barring a pretty substantial turnaround. The Ravens are at the beginning of that process with Lamar Jackson, and then you have a story like Joe Flacco, who isn't going to be a Hall of Famer, and certainly isn't someone who has been a wild success, but he did help you win a Super Bowl, and he had a really superb 6-year run, and then you look at the second half of his career, and you get into all the other variables, but this game on Sunday with the two quarterbacks, seeing where Winston was at one point, where he is now, the hope that the Ravens have for Lamar Jackson, and understanding that there's going to be growing pains and hopefully growth along the way. It is a really kind of interesting game in that way, but for the Ravens, unlike the Buccaneers, who are going nowhere, there's a lot riding on this game, and you got to be careful. And going back to the Ravens' style of play, we've talked about it. Their margin for error is just so small, so you better hope that secondary, even if it's banged up, it needs to be ready to play, because you fall behind 14-3, you fall behind 16-3, you fall behind 17-7, and suddenly you start to wonder, is Marty Morningwig going to continue to run the football, or are we going to see the Ravens try to throw it too much with Lamar Jackson, or do you go back to Joe Flacco? I mean, then you're kind of right back where you were previously.
Well, you do whatever you do to keep your season alive, like literally, right?
Well,
and that's going to be a minute-by-minute operation for the whole organization, based on scoreboards and based on injuries and based on what's working and what's not and where the adjustment is. But they got a guy with a cannon who won them a Super Bowl who's going to be holding the clipboard on the sidelines. I mean, it's... that's where we are. He's not some washed-up, has-been Johnny U, bow-legged, running out there and can't throw the football. I mean, his hip got hurt. He hasn't been seen since, and I think he'll be seen. I think it'll piss him off even more if he never throws the football again to go somewhere else and try to do well. But what does this mean for the Ravens in the next 4 weeks? Because that's really where it's at for me. This isn't about 3 weeks. If this is about 3 weeks, Lamar Jackson failed, John Harbaugh. If they don't get into the playoffs now, this is a tremendously disappointing season as I see it through this transition where they've had opportunities and things have been sitting there for them.
Sure. I mean, I think that's fair, and I think you just look at where they are right now in relation to the rest of the AFC wild card contenders, in relation to where the Pittsburgh Steelers are right now, and understanding what they have ahead of them these next 2 games.
I mean, there better be a football game on January 5th or 6th, right? Like, literally.
You kind of feel that way, right? I mean, if not, then...
That means you lost to the freaking Browns or the Buccaneers is what it means. Literally, right?
Rich,
that's what it means.
And I'll go back to something Tony Romo said during the CBS telecast, and I think there's some validity to it, even though I think there was validity to it with Joe Flacco at the helm as well. And let's face it, the Ravens have lost some games the last few years that they shouldn't have lost, and Flacco had some kind of hand in that, even though it wasn't all his fault. But he said with the Ravens style of play right now, you could envision them beating anybody, as they almost did against Kansas City on Sunday. And certainly stylistically, they were able to hang with a much, much better offense. Or you could see it going sideways really quickly, and you could see them losing to a team they shouldn't lose to. So I expect, if you're asking me right now, Nestor, what my prediction is, I think the Ravens are going to win 2 of the next 3. And what that means for the division and what that means for the wild card, it's going to depend on what other teams do. I just think that's where they're going to be. But that said, I wouldn't at all be shocked to see them not do that and to lose an extra game in there. Probably less. I would be less inclined to say it would come against Tampa Bay, but
dude, if the Browns come in here and end your season in 2 weeks, and Baker Mayfield cuts your throat, and John Harbaugh goes off and coaches the Packers, and I don't know, but I mean, it's like. There have been a lot of twists and turns already. I still feel like there's more ahead. You better make sure you're not the twist or the turn.
No question. But I'll just throw this out there. Put it this way. I view the Browns in Week 17, assuming Baker Mayfield doesn't get hurt or they don't have a slew of critical injuries, I view the Cleveland Browns in Week 17 more favorably than I viewed the Cincinnati Bengals in Week 17 last year. I'll just leave it at that. So, what does that mean? That means the Ravens better not sleepwalk, which they did in the first half of that Bengals game, and it ended up costing them when they completely, all over themselves on 4th and 12. So it really does speak to this style that they are embracing now, and they are officially going with this now because Lamar Jackson is their starter and Joe Flacco is their backup, and that's fine. Roll with it. I'm cool with that, but it does give you a smaller margin for error, not just because of Lamar. This is not just about Lamar Jackson versus Joe Flacco, but your defense needs to play at a high level. You cannot afford to come out flat defensively because you fall behind. It takes you away from the formula that you're trying to play. And you need to be sharp on special teams. And the fact that they have gotten 2 defensive touchdowns, 1 special teams touchdown, 1 almost special teams touchdown that set up a really short field for them on Sunday in KC, you need to continue to get those types of plays. You need to have good returns. You can't have lapses. You can't commit big penalties. But because this formula, like I said, there's a small margin for error. And look, that's not to say that they had a great margin for error with what they were doing with Flacco. It's not a one better than the other. It's different. So they want that to keep going. They need to continue to play as well as they have in all 3 phases because I think a lot of what they've been able to do over the last 4 weeks, people have pointed to the running game and time of possession. Time of possession is a give or take thing. It has to do with your offense sustaining drives, and it has to do with your defense getting off the field. Look what happened in that opening drive against New Orleans back in Week 7. The Saints had, a 10-minute drive? Now, they didn't score points on it, but you're telling me that the Ravens lost time of possession that game solely because of their offense? No, their defense couldn't get off the field. So it's a give-take thing. we always try to pin something on one person or one aspect of the game. I think the Ravens have climbed out of their midseason hole because they've played better across the board, and they've gotten better defense and better special teams play, and they've been able to run the ball even in lieu of not having much of a passing game, and that's worked out for them. Would it have worked out in other ways if Flacco never gets hurt? We don't know. Maybe, maybe not, but it does speak to how complementary this whole formula needs to be, more so than, say, a team like the Chiefs who are winning on the heels of a spectacular offense, and they're just hoping that their defense isn't so bad that it jeopardizes. Their defense can be bad; it just can't be horrendous, like it was against the Rams, for example. So it just really speaks to where the Ravens are as a football team right now, and how this great experiment is going to continue now.
The great experiment. He is Luke Jones, Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. He'll be in Owings Mills all week as we are getting ready for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Ryan Jensen, amongst some others, coming back. All of our WNST coverage brought to you by our friends at Lee Tessier and his great team of real estate agents, Baltimore's premier realty team, and the folks I'm trusting to sell my condo. Learn more about all that's going on with them at LeeTessier.com. Also, Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast, always brewed fresh. And don't forget to pick up your eggnog during the holidays there when you're picking up your fried chicken and Western fries. I've been away like a week and a half. I got to get back and get some Western fries and fried chicken. That sounds like dinner to me tonight. Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. Don't forget about the app as well. When you're using that, you download that, you get your gas with that. You'll be getting your fried chicken and your Western fries and your Kona Blend coffee free of charge. Also brought to you by our friends at King Discount Liquors. 'Tis the season for eggnog and holiday cheer and a little hottie toddy and all that good stuff. Pick up your holiday spirits at King Discount Liquors. Go see Johnny Bev and the King All-Stars in Rosedale. Luke Jones is our guest. Luke, getting banged up this time of the year, and obviously you lose your quarterback. You bring in another quarterback who was a first-round draft pick. That's where the Ravens are on that side of things. When your quarterback gets hurt, usually your starting quarterback, you don't start winning football games, which is probably part of the reason Lamar Jackson's starting this week. But other injuries, the secondary, where the team is right now, health, psychologically heading into these last 3 games, again, I feel like they're going to be in the playoffs, and maybe I'm just being myopic here, but I feel like the ingredients are here, that it's sitting there for them.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. I mean, but it was last year, right? And 2016, okay, they had to win a game in Pittsburgh, Week 16. That's not a given, but it was right there for them at the end, and they didn't do it then. So, that's where I keep going back to what happened against them against Kansas City, where I can empathize with Ravens fans who want to say phooey with the moral victory. Same old Ravens. It happened to them again, and I get that. When that happens to you a lot, there's some lingering fear there. There's some lingering frustration there, and that's totally fair. But I think to the point you made, when you look at where this team is health-wise, quarterback situation, of course, now that there's a resolution there because Flacco's healthy. I mean, they could go back to him if they wanted to. They're not going to, at least at this point in time. So you do look at their health. They've managed to avoid catastrophic season-ending kind of injuries. They've had injuries. Certainly they've had some games where they've been banged up, and the defense was really banged up before the bye week, which I think how they've played since then is indicative of them being healthier than they were at that point, not just about time of possession and just about the running game. But you do look at the secondary right now, and it makes you a little bit more nervous because you're dealing with groin injuries for Marlon Humphrey and Tavon Young. Groin injuries are not, I mean, any male listener right now, you kind of cringe when you hear that. But when you're talking about a defensive back who changes direction so rapidly and needs to be real agile and move well laterally, that potentially is something that can linger. And it has for Tavon Young. Marlon Humphrey tried to play through it, basically exited the game early in the third quarter. Don't think I saw him after that, although Harbaugh was trying to say that he was rotating with Anthony Averett. There was no rotating there. Marlon Humphrey couldn't go. I mean, he was pulled and hasn't been practicing at the start of the week this week. So there's definitely some concerns there that, okay, maybe you'll be all right against Tampa Bay, even though, as I pointed out, they do have a passing game that moves the ball and has had success when they're not throwing it to the other team. But what does that mean for the Chargers? What does that mean for Week 17 against a rookie quarterback that's playing at a pretty high level over the last month or so? What does that mean for January? We'll see. It's not something to panic about at this point, and I do think they have better depth in the secondary than they've had in a long time. But Marlon Humphrey missed the New Orleans game, lost. Missed the Carolina game, lost. Missed close to half of the Kansas City game, lost. Not the only reason they lost those games, but I think it does lend itself to how valuable he truly is, and in my mind has been the best player on this defense here in 2018, even though we've kind of talked about how this defense has been a sum-of-the-parts kind of group. No one that really stands out as being great, but just a bunch of guys that have been solid to good. So, I think you've got to stay healthy. There's no question about that. A serious injury to the wrong player really throws you into some significant peril when you're in the position that the Ravens are in where, all right, they're favored to be the number 6 seed in the AFC in comparison to Tennessee or Miami or Indianapolis, or any team you want to throw out there. But they don't have a colossal margin for error. I mean, if they lay an egg against Tampa Bay, then things change, and then that Chargers game looks that much more important. If they
there's gonna be plenty of scoreboard watching going, right? I mean, we're all involved in that beginning every Thursday, I guess, and where the Steelers are, and I haven't watched them play, so I can't say as to everything that's gone wrong. I'm seeing highlights, but my God, I mean, that was something that a month ago when the Ravens are 4-5, right, and on life support, and John Harbaugh and Bisciotti are going to part ways, and Flacco's never going to be heard from again, which is still the case, by the way. It really is an incredible narrative about all of this because we just go through and put W's and L's next to things every week. The Patriots and the Steelers and the Texans all sort of found out the hard way, right?
No doubt. I mean,
Chiefs almost did too.
That's what makes this league so popular because there is so much of that happens. I mean, last year was kind of the great example with what happened with Nick Foles and the Eagles. I mean, my goodness, you think about losing your MVP caliber quarterback in early December, and 6 weeks later they were raising the Lombardi Trophy for the first time in that team's history. So I mean, you never really know, and lots can change. I mean, Lamar Jackson could suffer a high ankle sprain on the third play of the game on Sunday, and we're talking about Joe Flacco the rest of the year. I mean, you never really know, and that's what makes it fun. And for the Ravens, it is sitting right there for them. But there's a lot that could go wrong. There's a lot that could go well. There are completely unforeseen circumstances. I mean, look what happened with Kansas City with Kareem Hunt. Now, you can talk about how that whole thing was handled, but the players and coaches in that locker room, they didn't foresee something like that happening when it did. So you never really know what's going to happen. I mean, look at the Ravens with Patrick Ricard this past week. Racist and homophobic tweets of his from 6 years ago, someone digs up and suddenly players are answering questions about that. And he rightfully should answer questions about that. And he did address his teammates, and it appears that teammates have been willing to acknowledge that was the past and not who he is now. And it appears that they have forgiven him to the point where he's going to stay on the team. But, that's something you don't plan for, that no one's anticipating, and all of a sudden that's a story.
Well, there's a crisis around the corner in this league everywhere, in all 32 locker rooms, in a sport where your quarterback or anybody else can be taken out. And I guess when it does get down to the nitty-gritty and you got 3 games left and 2 of them are at home and you're supposed to win them and other teams appear to be breaking down, it does feel good to sort of smell yourself a little bit and say, here we are. It's sitting in our hands. We don't need any help from anybody else. And we have a relatively favorable schedule. And I guess, which was my point to start all of this, relatively favorable health versus the mean, right?
Yeah. I mean, you look at some of the guys that are on IR right now. I mean, their IR list as it stands on December 12th, 13th, 14th, this middle of the month, going into week 15. That's for their injured reserve list. Rookie wide receiver Jaleel Scott, rookie safety Deshaun Elliott, Alex Collins. Okay, although Alex Collins really hadn't played all that well this year. Stanley Jean-Baptiste, DeLance Turner, Greg Sinat, and Willie Henry. Okay, Willie Henry, legitimate defensive line rotation depth there, guy who gave them some nice contributions last year. You look at that list compared to where they've been the last, especially last year, and go back to 2015, 2016, they had some spots, they had some injuries at some wrong times, but overall, they were relatively healthy that season, but they've been very blessed in that regard, and everyone's reaching the knock on wood right now as I say that, but they are in a position that, even with the unknown of the quarterback and what this offense is going to look like moving forward and whether they can continue to do this, I mean, those questions are going to be there, but it is sitting there for them to break through and get back to the playoffs. And you hope, based on what they did against the Chiefs on the road, arguably the toughest road environment in the NFL, you're hoping maybe that's a sign that they aren't just going to get into the playoffs, but they have the potential to make some noise. We'll see. Or they could sleepwalk and Jameis Winston has his best game of the year and a couple guys get hurt and they end up losing 24-23 on Sunday, and then everything's different, and everything's changed. And
it'll change the demeanor of me watching the Steelers or the Patriots at 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that, right?
I mean,
not often I root for the Patriots, but this is going to be the week. We're all going to be Patriots this week.
It really is so fickle when you really think about it. I mean, even go back to where we were 4 weeks ago talking about Joe Flacco's injury and whether Lamar Jackson could guide them, help not mess it up, and they could figure out a way to win a game or two, and then Flacco would come back, and that I don't think anyone necessarily expected it to play out this way. I think people thought it was possible it could play out this way, but we always try to know before you can really know, right? I mean, we're always trying to be so definitive, and us guys in the radio business are as guilty of that as anyone. You always want to be definitive. You don't want to have a lukewarm take, no pun intended there, I hope, but the reality is there is so much unknown.
How do you never use that pun? I've known you 10 years. I've never called
right?
I've never heard you call anything lukewarm.
Well, and I truly admit I'm also the guy that's not going to make a definitive statement on something if I'm not sure about it. So I'm not sure about all this, but for the information that we have and the variables that are there and the schedule that is there and understanding where the Steelers are and what the tiebreaker profile is for the wild card, I think you do have to feel pretty good about where the Ravens are right now. Does that mean it's going to turn out the way they want it to? I have no clue. But it should be in line for them to be 9-7 at the very least, and then you see where Pittsburgh is in that process and what happens with the rest of these teams. I mean, give Miami a lot of credit for what they did against New England last week, but are you trusting the Dolphins to win out or to be in a position where they're winning 2 of their last 3? I'm certainly not. Tennessee looks great sometimes, and they look horrendous other times. The Colts look like they were going to be the team that could maybe emerge, and then they laid an egg in Jacksonville 2 weeks ago, although then they manned up against Houston. So you just don't know, and that's what makes this fun. Buck Showalter used to always say, if we truly knew how it all was going to turn out, boy, it would be really boring. So I'm going to borrow that expression and kind of buckle up and see where the weirdness takes the Ravens over the next few weeks, because certainly the last 5 weeks or so have been very weird for this organization, and the next 3 weeks at the very least going to be very pivotal for their future. I think everyone would agree with that, no matter how you feel about Lamar Jackson versus Joe Flacco or John Harbaugh or whoever else you want to throw into the uncertainty of what lies ahead in the future.
Well, hopefully we see 0 no-look passes this week. And by the way, despite all of this confusion that you have, Harold Baines is still a Hall of Famer, and I wonder how Buck Showalter would feel about that.
My goodness.
I'm winding him up, folks. He is Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. We'll be discussing Harold Baines as a Hall of Famer, as well as Lee Smith, as well as all sorts of things around here as we get ready for the Buccaneers and the Ravens. We got Terps games. We've had some battles of Baltimore. I've been breathing fire all night and urinating excellence with Tony Robbins the last week, so I've been a little off the grid. Good to be back. I will be at the ballpark on Sunday. We're going to be around all week. You can always find me in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.